Avowed makes me roll my eyes every time I look at it, and unfortunately, the closer we're getting to the actual mainline release, I already know that things are going to become far more insufferable as time goes on. Avowed, in case you don't know, is in the same universe as the Pillars of Eternity games, which honestly, I gotta admit, it is smart of Obsidian to pick a pre-established franchise they've already worked on to mold this game around. I would love to see a Baldur's Gate game made within the style of an Elder Scrolls-like game. But I think when it comes to Avowed, and that we as players seem to have won the battle of ideology here. And overall, I guess I kind of want to ask the question, which is that, are video games regressing? Like, as a medium? Let's talk about it. Firstly, you have places like thegamer.com, which is kind of a cesspool that always tries to skirt around things in order to push a narrative. They recently stated that Avowed is a top seller on Steam, and if you were to read this, you would believe it. However, they immediately countered their own statement, where here in their summary they state that Avowed is the top selling game, but only in the United Kingdom side of Steam, not the whole world. Oh, okay, so then Avowed is not the best selling game on Steam, is it? This is like me saying that my grandma thinks I'm the most handsome boy in the world while ignoring what everyone else's grandma thinks of me. But maybe this analogy doesn't work because both my grandmas are dead. Anyway, moving on. It is interesting to see how websites are trying to run damage control already for Avowed like this. I think the game would have been received decently enough if their art director wasn't an absolute insane person. The same guy who said that he wants to replace all white people with black people at Obsidian, as if this somehow would make the gaming industry better. I genuinely just think that these game designer types are just self-loathing people, and they will say whatever is politically correct in order to weasel their way into the goodwill of the very people they are pandering to, who will definitely not care who or what happens to them whenever they leave or end up dying. I can't imagine pandering to people who genuinely just view you as an awful human being on no basis but simply your skin color. It's such a bizarre thing to champion in my opinion, but thankfully the world is waking up to this nonsense and people are not buying it as much anymore. And when I look at Avowed, I see a bunch of stuff that just doesn't interest me. The combat, yeah, that seems fine enough. Mostly because it's just Skyrim with guns, I guess. But then you have weird characters like this thing here, which somehow has a mustache on top of its overgrown furry face. You know how hairy you have to be to grow a mustache over an entire body of hair like that? If I saw this thing in real life, I would smash it with a hammer. Of course, to the surprise of nobody, Jason Schreier loves Avowed because it ticks all the right boxes for him. I need to remind you, this is the same guy who championed Veilguard when it came out with his infamous "Go Woke, Go Break the Charts" tweet that he did eventually delete when the game failed and didn't reach the highs that he claimed it would. We see you, Jason, you're trying to be slick, but it isn't working. But what's extra funny to me is how a few months back, the art director of Avowed tried to paint Elon Musk as a bad guy because Elon claimed that pronouns in a fantasy game were stupid. Then Matt Hansen, the art director, would reply back, "Then, I wanted so badly to make him mad with my game and I cannot believe it actually happened. Just wait until you see the default, you sad little shit." So Matt Hansen confirms that he deliberately wanted Avowed to anger people like Elon Musk with their integration of pronouns and whatever else in the game. Not a good look, I know. But it's very obvious that between then and now, Obsidian has absolutely realized that the political climate of the world has definitely changed. Because Avowed is in early access right now, and people playing it have confirmed that, as you can see right here on screen, that Avowed now has an option when you make your character to completely disregard and remove the pronoun options from the game entirely now. I know this pissed off Matt Hansen badly, since he spent literal years pushing for this slot to be in the game. Some people might look at this and go, well, this is Obsidian caving into Gamergate, they are giving you what you want, so is the game now worth playing? The jury is still out on that one if you ask me. Whether I play it or not, it wouldn't be anytime soon, since I'm a PlayStation player primarily anyways. So I can't exactly play Avowed when I want to at launch anyways, but it doesn't bother me because I'm drowning in games right now to begin with. That being said, seeing these types being forced to implement features that completely remove the very things they added to own the chud, so to speak, is very validating and honestly hilarious if we're being honest. Unfortunately, there's not an in-game option to make Avowed not look like a mushroom-infested nightmare of a game. I think despite it being a first-person Elder Scrolls-like game, the end result is just still not my cup of tea solely based on how everything looks. There's this very how do I put this, storybook but kind of goofy look to everything in the game from the previews. And personally, I'm kind of over this look in games already, and I yearn for a far more serious, darker tone in my fantasy RPGs going forward. Maybe it's just because I'm getting older and my knees crack when I walk, but I'm just not as interested in stuff that looks like it's full of animatronic Furbies with mustaches. The entire art design of this game, which unironically was shepherded by this Matt Hansen guy who clearly hates people like me, is probably going to be the major reason why I avoid Avowed entirely anyways. I just simply don't like how it looks. Again, will I try it when it comes to PlayStation? I don't know, but my gut reaction right now is that it kind of just gives off that Tiny Tina Wonderlands look kind of, but it's also mixed with Fable, but like that new Fable look, if that makes sense. But it's also kind of pathetic how we are 14 years removed from Skyrim, and yet how that game looks and operates is still some of the best RPGing you can have in a game even to this day. I replayed Skyrim when the remaster of the remaster came out on PS5 because I hadn't played it in a while. And lo and behold to myself, not even realizing it, but I played it so much I ended up 100%ing the main game, and I got all the trophies for it. And it ended up being the best game that I played in 2021, which yeah, I know, how can an older game be the best game you played that year? But in my defense, 2021 was very barren for good releases and nothing really spoke to me that year. So the fact that Skyrim just ended up being the best game I played that year, I guess which kind of tells you where gaming is headed, isn't necessarily the best thing right now to hear. I guess I just kind of yearn for games to be fantasy worlds or whatever else, and just not bring in the real life nonsense into them. But unfortunately, that just doesn't seem to be the case for a lot of these Western studios anymore. They just can't help themselves, it seems. It sucks how you think you can play something and get lost in the world, but can't actually because the developers keep reminding you of their delusional real-world takes. Like, let's pivot from Avowed and the whole Pillars of Eternity thing for a second here to look at Magic the Gathering. A different franchise, sure, but these are all kind of the same thing. They're fantasy RPG stuff in the end. Anyway, this is from Games Radar Plus. Magic the Gathering lead designer says trans people, people of color, and women playing a larger role are all part of modern fantasy because they're all part of the actual world. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So this stems from Mark Rosewater. He's the lead designer on Magic the Gathering and how he believes that fantasy works. Whether it's card games, tabletop, video games like Avowed, all of it should reflect the real world and be representative of the powers and people within it. Rosewater responds to a fan question who pleaded that Magic the Gathering doesn't include stuff like a million pronouns and stuff like trans fairies. Well, here's what he said. For far too long, fantasy as a genre was used as a way to reflect the worldview of those in power. It leaned into stereotype and reflected how the privileged wished the world was. He continues with, entertainment is at its best when it lifts everyone up and isn't used as yet another means to ignore certain people's reality. But that's the thing, Mark. Fantasy isn't reality. That's why it's called fantasy. The entire point of the genre, whether it's Magic or Avowed, is that it should not represent or look like anything we are accustomed to seeing in the real world. If I wanted to see a bunch of they-themers, I would just go attend a furry convention. Like I've said many times already, it's not that having politics in your games or your books is a bad thing necessarily. It's that you need to ensure that the politics that are within your work are political, but within the confines of the world. One of my favorite games of all time is Final Fantasy Tactics. If you played it, you'd know where I'm going with this. That game's story and world is heavily political. You play a half-royal blood warrior named Ramza Beolov, who is thrusted into a massive war called the War of the Lions, and it ends up plunging the entirety of Ivalice into utter chaos as lawlessness runs rampant, sides are chosen, and even Ramza's best friend from childhood, a man named Delita, he decides that it's up to him alone to completely unravel the corruption that is strangling Ivalice's population into inevitable oblivion. The game's entire plot is about politics. Lords and kings are fighting, bandits and mercenaries are betraying one another, and innocent lives are being lost. You face off against all kinds of institutions, from corrupt religions, kingdoms, and even eventually uncover a sinister plot that involves magical beings that are core to the War of the Lions. Final Fantasy Tactics is about as political a game as you can get. However, it doesn't speak on, say, Donald Trump or anything else. Well, the game did come out in the 90s. But even then, its story was not designed to be a big FU, so to speak, to the real-world politics or any one leader of its time. It uses politics and religious extremism and the bigotry of man but it then combines it within the confines of its own world, where you're faced with plenty of things that you must overcome. But again, they rightfully and smartly put these things within the world of Evilise, not America or, say, China. And this is why games like Tactics, or hell, even Skyrim 2, are beloved to this day. Nobody said that you can't have politics or slavery or anything else really in your games. The problem is that creators today are regressing these ideas, and I guess this is the point of this entire video even, which is that it feels as though modern gaming, books, trading card games, tabletop, whatever else you want to throw into this cauldron that I'm cooking here, it's not really interested in being uniquely their own worlds anymore. They instead need to constantly remind you of the world you exist in instead of focusing on the world that they are tasked with making so you can get lost in it. Does that make sense? So when I look at Avowed, I see zoomer haircuts that are on like lizard people. I don't really feel like I'm in a fantasy setting. I feel more like I'm in an activist propaganda simulator where they can't help themselves when it comes to making these worlds actually feel unique. Even Baldur's Gate 3, at least, does a great job of conveying its ideas through its world and design so that it just feels like Baldur's Gate. And the fact that you can't even interact with basically anything in Avowed, that is a huge red flag. Don't believe me? Here's a clip from G-Man Lives. He reviewed the game recently, and hopefully this part of the video doesn't get copyrighted by him. But here's G-Man Lives explaining how a lot of Avowed is simply just window dressing. Please watch.
That's supposed to be a role-playing game, I was also surprised at just how little role-playing there actually is. Walking around the various towns, for instance, they may as well be empty because outside of the few merchants or NPCs you can interact with, everything else is just window dressing, with people all standing around idly to give the illusion of the place actually being bustling. You can't even attack the guards or the other NPCs with your weapons having no effect. You can't break into people's homes, you can't pickpocket anyone, and you can outright steal someone's belongings from right under their nose and they're not even gonna react.
I'm not climbing up there. The tower's barely standing.
Even the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout games would let you randomly attack otherwise friendly NPCs if you wanted to, forcing you to then pay the toll for your actions. And Morrowind had that infamous message if you locked a playthrough into a so-called doomed world, letting you still play on to experience that reality you created. But yeah, here we are in 2025 with a so-called AAA game that's been in development for half a decade, where things have regressed so much that any kind of genuine player freedom's just been completely removed.
Meanwhile,
You see what I'm saying? How are we in the year 2025 having games coming out that don't allow you, the player, to interact with it in any meaningful way? Obsidian made an Elder Scrolls-like game, but forgot that the most important thing about these sorts of games is how the player can interact with that world in different and meaningful ways. Avowed also, by the way, it has no romance options either. But besides that, I think it's a much bigger deal that you cannot, even if you want to, steal anything or pickpocket people of any kind or, break into someone's house. What the hell is the point of this world if you can't interact with the citizens within it and the things around them? You can't lockpick a door at night to steal inventory, you can't even attack the guards or cause any problems for the local populace. Yet in Skyrim, again 14 years ago at this point, the entire world was just utterly reactive. You can steal anything, kill people aplenty if you want to, I guess, and you can lockpick and pickpocket people to your heart's desire. So why are these video games regressing like this when we've already played these things that were so much better in the past? Credit where it's due. I am playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 right now. I'm maybe, 50 hours into the game maybe? I finally reached the second region. While I have problems with the game from janky controls, weird audio and visual bugs, and sometimes things don't work, like beds I sleep in that are labeled as my bed, committing me of a crime somehow. At the very least, the world of Kingdom Come 2, it does feel very reactive, like how Skyrim did. I can break into anything I want and steal anything pretty much. I had to get a dress for this woman for like a local wedding. It was a quest, but I didn't want to spend my own money. So I waited till midnight, I broke into the house of the tailor, then I pickpocketed his keys while he was sleeping. Then I broke into his store across the street, and then I robbed his entire inventory blind. And then I got the dress I needed for this woman that I was bringing to this wedding. It's a whole thing, I don't want to spoil it, but anyway, at the very least, despite the problems I have with Kingdom Come 2, I can confidently say that the game's world, at least, it feels reactive like Skyrim's did. And it's pathetic to see something like Avowed over here not giving the same level of player freedom. I hate it when open world RPG games, or whatever kind of games, just keep reminding you that they are video games, if that makes any sense. How could a game like Avowed, which has been in development for 5 years at least, not have plenty of the core fundamental options that games over 10 years ago had? Like even in The Witcher, you can cause havoc. Sure, you can't lockpick or pickpocket because Geralt isn't that kind of character, but I mean, come on, man. It just feels like these games are removing more and more player choices, yet they cost the same or sometimes even more, in the case of Avowed if you want to pay for early access. Then you got places like Rolling Stone magazine, which attempted to push the narrative that Avowed is the true successor to Skyrim. But how can it be the true successor if it lacks plenty of the basic elements that Skyrim had to begin with? A window dressing world you can't interact with cannot be the successor to Skyrim, a game that actually feels alive. It's just plain nonsense, but here's what Rolling Stone's article further states. Authority is the core theme of Avowed, how it creeps in and shapes our lives without consent and the ways in which people can choose to push back against it. So much of the game's writing explores the boundaries of the governments that define society and what it looks like when those guardrails are absent. It's a compelling exploration of morality that doesn't just present players with tough choices, but asks them to ruminate on the question of what authority means to each person. But it also peppers in smaller motifs like the value of human life, the comforts provided by spirituality, and the importance of ecological preservation. As the US and other countries face down increasingly single-minded and downright tyrannical governments, the stories that Avowed explores feel direly urgent and apply to much more than just its fantasy world. There it is again. Of course, Hayes Madsen, the writer of this article, would find some way to throw some dirt at Trump in his review about Avowed of all things. And that's what I mean. Whether Avowed meant to allude to its tyranny as some comparison to Trump, the fact that this writer here can't help but make the connection and put that in the review, yeah, it's cringe as hell, man. I fully expect this reoccurrence of tyranny is bad equals conservatives narrative to be aplenty for the next 4 years. And it's not just video games, it's the writers of these websites who have too regressed in their own way of speaking to the reader. Simply put, they don't really speak to someone like me anymore. It's not because they're liberals. I've read plenty of articles made by leftists and I've had no problems with them in games. It's the fact that this so-called new age of writers, I guess, are just the same person copy and pasted over and over again. They all think the same. Orange man bad, Gamergate evil, add pronouns, and I give your game a good score. This is what I mean when I say that it just feels like things are regressing in the sense that not only are these games claiming that they have plenty of player choice, while restricting you to meaningfully react to the world around you, which is the antithesis of choice, but these writers are just tiring to listen to, man. They can't even write a review about a game full of hairy Furbies and lizard people without somehow bringing up the real world. This problem is everywhere, and I'm sick of it. What happened to just making games that don't talk down to people? Never mind the fact that Avowed doesn't look next generation at all. I genuinely am puzzled by how Microsoft Studios specifically have also regressed in terms of graphics and pushing the envelope when it comes to making what games can and should look like, considering back in the day, they were like at the forefront of this. I mean, yeah, it doesn't help that you have games recently announced like Tides of Annihilation, which is multi-platform, that looks like this. And how the hell can I look at this game and then go back looking at Avowed and think to myself that there's something in the water over there in the West that is making everything worse? By the way, unsurprisingly, Tides of Annihilation is of course yet another AAA Chinese game, and I mean, look at it, man. This looks incredible. Why is the West incapable of creating things like this nowadays? Even the women in Tides, they look like actual females, not whatever this is in Avowed. Why is it that China is able to give players what they want consistently, while the West is content with churning out slop every other week? It's not all Western devs, I know, but the point still remains that these recent releases, for the most part from the West, they're all just the same tired old game genres, blueprints if you will, over and over again. I recently saw the new trailer for Borderlands 4, and I kid you not, when I saw it, I felt nothing. I didn't feel hyped at all. The only power that kinda looked distinct, I guess, from the new Vault Hunters was that fire and ice axe attack. Everything else just kinda washed over me like a nameless tsunami of visual fluff. Where are the new ideas? Where are the games that actually evolve their genres and franchises? Avowed looks like it came out in 2016, not 2025. I'm not saying that every game needs to look like Tides of Annihilation. But can we at least get some new ideas in these Western franchises? It's all so boring and it's the same thing over and over again. The amount of games that are just struggling to even come out is worrying as well. Did you know that it's been 2 years since that Wonder Woman game made by the Shadow of Mordor team was announced? And that Warner Bros. Has already spent over $100 million on that game and it's nowhere near being done. It's changed directors multiple times and plenty of key creatives involved with that Wonder Woman game, they already left to form their own indie game studios. And to add insult to injury, the infamous Cypher of Tyr, a well-known activist who definitely champions DEI, is apparently one of the writers on Wonder Woman, and even so, the game is in development hell. How hard could it be to make a Wonder Woman game? I mean, yeah, kinda lazy, but whatever, just take God of War, make it Wonder Woman, make it semi-open world, make her fight mystical beasts. Have different swords and spears, etc. that she can use and upgrade and make her whip get stronger, and then she can use her whip to get the info out of people. Yeah, sure, it wouldn't be the most unique game ever made, but at this point, whatever it is that they're doing is clearly not working. I just can't believe they have Cypher of Tyr as a writer on that game, man. That lady publicly blasted CD Projekt Red for the lack of trans and gay representation in Cyberpunk. Madam Savvy had a whole thing about this. She exposed all of it. I'll put it on screen. And then this Cypher lady shut up immediately once CD started sending her free swag bags and trinkets all the time. They even sent this woman food, dude. You can't make this up. And this is another problem with gaming these days. The quality of the game's writing in the West, at least, it has also hit an all-time low. Everything has to be about being oppressed, resisting the white man, and proving that the future is female despite every attempt they've made about this has failed miserably, and rightfully so. And at what point do these things just finally stop happening? Avowed looks like it was made for the modern audience, and then it lacks features that games 3 times its age already have. And then we're just supposed to accept this very obvious lack of delivery from these game studios, otherwise we're what, enemies of these developers? Every time I see a new Western game get announced, I genuinely just feel apathy for it, because I'm 85% of the time thinking to myself, okay, but how will they screw this one up? Like, it's crazy how things have changed. Did you know that Uncharted 2 took 22 months to develop? Not even 2 years. And yet Wonder Woman has been in development for longer and they don't even have any gameplay out yet. What is going on with video games? Are we okay? It just seems that we're heading towards a point where these things either need to start working or this industry just collapses entirely, Western-wise I mean. The Chinese and Japanese and Koreans are making hit after hit, but with the rare good-selling Western game like Kingdom Come 2, what else do they have? The success versus the failure ratio of Westernized games is staggeringly lopsided these days. And it's a problem that is plaguing video games all over. We truly are just regressing as a medium. Things are costing more, they're looking worse somehow, and having way less options or replayability too. Yet they're also taking 3 times as long to make, and most of the time they flop anyways because some idiot who thinks there's 900 genders gets hired somehow and ends up sabotaging everything that everybody else has worked on because their script and their characters are bad. At what point do we realize that these things just need to change? Fantasy games especially need to stop adhering to or trying to emulate the real world. Because the fantasy world is not the real world. That's the whole point. It's called fantasy. It's in the name. And then if you tell me that your fantasy world is just one big place you can yell about Trump or something, I don't want to play your game. I'm just beyond sick of seeing so many franchises I know and love dying like this. And at this rate, China's just going to own everything in the end anyways. And when they do, they definitely won't let these Western devs add their stupid beliefs to their games anymore. And then what? It's just all a battle to the bottom, and it's clear that the rot is still coming even if the entire woke movement has to some degree died pretty much. And lost a ton of their goodwill and funding thanks to the whole USAID scandal that I covered already in other videos. You ask me, gaming has 2 paths forward. We all either accept the slop, or we reject it. And I think I know which way it's going to go, and if you ask me, it seems like the end game here is the complete and utter dismembering of these sorts of games because at this point, these games are just, they're no longer windows into new worlds, but thinly disguised lectures from people who just think they're better than you in every way, and they're really mad that you aren't willing to accept that as truth. But what do you think? Let me know. Weird video, I know, but thanks for watching, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.